I got it. Thank you. I can't quite get myself where I want to be, Amy. And so you're going to have to keep moving as I move. Oh my goodness. Okay. Well, as I get into the stuff behind me, I'll move so that Mari, did you get the handout that I posted on Classroom? You'll want that for today. So just so everyone knows, and hi. Okay, let me get here. I got here and the guy who normally puts down all the salt and stuff, I guess hadn't been able to get in, so I was surprised to be putting down salt instead of getting like focused and grounded. And so good to see you all again. What you'll need today, and then I'll let you know what we're doing and who the heck this lady is. There's someone next to me. I don't know who she is, Mari. You will want this if you have it with you. If you don't, that's okay. No big deal. You will want, if you're here in the room, I printed a handout, but you're also welcome just to use the version online is color. And it's also the wrong way. No matter what I did, like on my computer, it's the right way. And then when I post it on Classroom, it goes. So I don't know, but I'm sure you can rotate it on your screen if you would like to not be doing that. Let's see. How was sadhana? Yeah? Was it a nice way to start the day? Even if some parts got to you? Like, where's Shawan? Oh yeah, you said, what got to you, the Kriya? Yeah, it's intense. Did everyone do something new to you? Like something you've never done before? That's kind of cool, right? When you start a day and you're like, okay, I've done something I've never done before today. Like I've stepped into unfamiliar territory and I survived. So good job. So this is Amy Kelly. I'm going to turn that over. This is Mari on here. And Amy and also Rebecca, who will be here around 10:30, she's teaching class, are doing an internship for the Yoga Sutras. So they are learning how to, they sat in your seats at one point and are you looking at your old notes? Oh my gosh. It's kind of a trip, right? Like I don't know. I think it's so, there is this point where you're like, but I want to, like, learning to teach something lets you go even deeper, which I think is cool. And I think to kind of keep that in mind as we're going through the sutras, one piece of it, at least our goal for you is really, well, maybe threefold. I should get my notes out. If I go off script, we're all in trouble. But you know, it's really to give you a foundational understanding of this particular yoga philosophy. There are others. There are lots of others, actually. And to help to support you and to encourage you to make it, find ways to think about how it's applicable to your life and to your teaching. Because I think too, when you start to bring things in, if you're teaching, it gives you this layer when you start to teach things of just that deeper understanding. So thinking about how could this be a theme, but without whacking people over the head with big Sanskrit words and yoga philosophy. I think when we learn to simplify things, it also helps us to wrap our heads around things. So I love getting to teach the Yoga Sutras so dang much. And the Bhagavad Gita, which will be starting next month. It is, this is my jam. And I also have to tell you, I get nervous for the first one because there is so much to cover. And I have to remind myself what I'm going to remind you right now. So this is the first 16 sutras. And if you didn't get a chance to read them yet, that's fine. I know some of you signed up just like this last week. And that's okay. We're going to talk about them and then it'll help you when you read it. But these first 16 sutras, if you read it and you're kind of like, whoa, or if after today you read it and after today you're like, whoa, understand please that Tanjali just throws you in the deep end. This is a text written for people who studied this since they were just kids. They understand what the goal of yoga is. They understand there's just a deeper understanding that they're walking into this with, even just culturally, understanding, they're going to understand what karma is and some of the implications that come up early on that we have to go back and learn in a different way. So I want to tell you, please grant yourself lots of grace. Please grant me lots of grace. And if you has anyone read the sutras the whole way through? Not necessarily this version, but just all 196 sutras.
Listening to it.
What version are you listening to? Yeah, go ahead though. I'll come back to you. Because one thing. So, okay, good. No one's read it. So we're all kind of like, you may have had, I don't know how much you had in your 200-hour. Did you go into the sutras much?
Mhm.
Did you do them all or just kind of some big ideas?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, cool. So
The Yoga Sutras of Patanjali.
who's the commentator or the translator?
By Sri Swami.
Satchitananda. Okay. I thought it was that one because that's one of the only ones on audio. So Amy's listening to the one by Sri Satchitananda, who, by the way, has one of my favorite commentaries on the Bhagavad Gita. But his commentary on the sutras, I just want to warn you, Amy, it's fantastic. It's also written with a lot of presumptions around having a certain amount of knowledge first. So, but while I say that, I also want to say it's really nice to, I always read at least two commentaries at a time. So when I'm preparing for this, I will review Carrera. Usually I've read it so many times now that not always with as much focus, and then I'm usually reading another one of these that are in front of, I know Mari, you can't see it, but I've got a little stack of books here. And I would say if you really want to get more is find another commentary and read them together and realize that the sutras, anyone who's writing commentary on it is writing with a bias. There is never just here's what they mean and it's true and that's how it is. Now, I'm going where I didn't mean to go yet, Amy. By the way, if you're looking at notes and you're like, oh crap. So the original commentator is Vyasa. He is considered, because the sutras, let me just stop. I'll come back to this. I'll get back to all this in a minute. All of that to just say, like today, the first 16 sutras is an awful lot because it covers all of the big ideas of all of the sutras. And that means that we're going to keep dipping that cloth in the following months as we read more. So that, right, you know this one I use, right? Dipping it in the dye. Today, that cloth may come out with barely any dye on it, and you're like, what the heck? Or maybe you're like, oh, I kind of remember some of this from 200 and it's starting to saturate a little, get a little more colorful. It's okay wherever you are, and just realize that each time as we read, we'll get into each of these notions a little deeper. It's just, he wrote it literally just being like, tossing you in the deep end and then elaborating on those deep end ideas. We will spend more time today on the first two sutras, kind of first three. So if you're looking at your clock and you're like, oh, dear Lord, Amber, like, how are we going to get this done in time if you spend this much on each sutra? Don't worry about it. There's some that we just kind of zoom by. We should get through all of them today. We may not. We always fall behind on the sutras. We always do. It's pretty inevitable. And yet somehow at the end, there's like this like weird yoga sutra miracle and we get through them all. I don't know how it happens. We're always by the last one. We're like, crap. And then it happens. So, just know that, yeah. So the sutras, I want to give you first a little bit of history on them. You may, because I don't know what you, our 200 hours changed over time. So depending on when you took it, you may or may not have had this. If you're in 200 hour, you may not have done this yet. If you're from another training, who knows? So a little bit of history, a little bit around the tradition. We will do the sutras today, and then we will also discuss the underlying philosophy of Samkhya. That's the plan. That's all. Let me see. All right, let's dive in. So the Yoga Sutra, every single thing you ever read, it's funny in yoga, I think any philosophy or tradition has this, but every school, every sub-school, subsect of the school has their own interpretation. And so they even argue, there's a lot of argument over the age too. It's probably 1800 to 2000 years old. Like I've been reading this other version that puts it at 2200 years old. It doesn't really matter. What matters is, does it work? So it's old enough, no matter whether it's 1800 or 2500 years old. Some people say one of the chapters might be 4000 years old. That's not what matters. What matters is it's old enough and tested enough for us to have pretty good confidence that it's what it says works. And moreover, that it's, why not try it and see for yourself and see what works or not for you. It's when something's written, we just know that that's when these ideas are codified and put down. They may be much older. They may have already had their height of practice and now they're waning, and Patanjali's like, oh crap, I better write them down before these ideas get lost. Or maybe it hadn't been put together, coalesced in this kind of way before, and this is the first time it was. We just don't know. So when someone is giving you specific dates, there's just all kinds of arguments around it. Who cares? I just like to point that out because also older doesn't mean better. We really just want to say to ourselves, is it sustainable? Can I do this stuff? And is it working? Right? Somewhere in your first 16 sutras, Carrera gives you a sign. So what's cool about the sutras is you need a little bit of blind faith to jump in and try yoga, right? Like to be like, okay, this seems to be working for other people. I'll give it kind of my logic, my heart, everything kind of goes with it. So I'm going to give it a try. That takes a little bit of blind faith. But really, the cool thing about yoga is it's a practical philosophy. So it is do these things, and this is what's going to happen. So what is one of the signposts that you are on the path and that the yoga is working? Do you remember? It's kind of buried in there, and I know you read a lot.
Was it less reactivity?
Yeah, more peaceful, less reactivity. And that is one of the signs that, hey, this stuff's doing something. And I suspect you felt that in your own life, right? And it's not what Austin was talking about last night with the honeymoon with yoga. I feel like at first we kind of do have this unicorns and rainbow thing with yoga where we're like, it's going to fix everything and I'm going to be happy all the time. And then we're like, oh no, I'm not, right? But we see this upward progression over time, this trend where it's like we still have days that are utter crap, but maybe our reaction to them is a smidge different, a smidge calmer, a smidge more peaceful than it would have been before, resulting in slightly different results. And as we do that, we get this upward trend over our lives. So I believe you already see this, and I probably don't have to convince you of that because you're in a 300-hour training. But just remember, that's always at least one of the big measures. Any practice you're undertaking over time, is that what it's doing for you? And I just love that about yoga, because it's not trying to scare you into doing anything. It's just like, hey, try this. You'll find out it works. Just do the things. So all of that said, this text is not the only yoga tradition. And there are several traditions that use this text. So it's the Indian traditions are unbelievably tangled and vast and complicated to figure out what starts where, what is what, what's connected to what, where did this begin? And I just do want to point this out, that this is, as it happens, this is one of the texts that that really caught on fire in the West because of the teachers we happen to get from India, who are Ashtanga yoga practitioners. This book is Ashtanga yoga. Does anyone know what Ashtanga means? You heard that? Have you heard of the style Ashtanga? Right? So this is where it can get confusing. Ashtanga yoga means Ashta is 8 and Anga, so 8 limbs. Like Chaturanga is 4 limbs. Ashtanga is 8 limbs. This is the 8-fold path. There's 8 things we do. The 8 branches, the 8 limbs, which you might remember from 200 Hour. Confusing things is the fact that Patabi Joyce, who was a student who is a follower of Ashtanga, of this text, he called his style of yoga Ashtanga. So true people doing his style, they also do the 8 limbs, but people outside of his style can also be Ashtanga yogis. That's confusing, huh? But this is also called Raja yoga, Raja, R-A-J-A, meaning royal or king yoga.
They're interchangeable terms?
Pretty much.
Okay.
I mean, they don't mean, the words don't mean that, the translation's not the same, but when we're talking about this kind of yoga, you could use either, for sure, yeah. And just another little side note, how you want to learn about this stuff is up to you. If you like to just sit back and listen, and like Austin said last night, just kind of see what sticks, that's great. If you want to be real academic and take a ton of notes, that's great too. But either way will work for this program. You'll get some questions about it, about key ideas in your review that you get monthly. But, and by the way, those reviews, you can talk to each other and be like, I can't figure out this answer. Yeah. All right. So we know it's old. We don't know how old. We know it's one of many traditions out of India, and within that, many yoga traditions. And it supports many traditions. So that's why when you're looking at different commentaries, because I want to talk to you, Mari, I'll be right back, about why we choose the translation and commentary that we choose quickly. I love so many commentaries, and I would love to give you a commentary written by a person from India. However, so far, I have not found one that that is suitable for people in the West who haven't grown up with certain ideas to be introduced to it. This is the best we've got so far. That's also of a good length. Because there are editions that are probably will go into more detail, maybe better explanation, but they're not practical for our purposes. We couldn't ask you to read like 3 or 4 volumes like this or bigger. So that's why we choose this. I feel like Herrera, his commentary, he's from a school of yoga, so it does have a bias. That said, it's not a strong one. And so I also like that. Where there's biases, I'll point them out to you. And I'll just say, and other people believe this. I'm not gonna, well, maybe I'll go through all of these. These are in, I think you have a references or recommended reading kind of thing. This is Edwin Bryant's, also a white guy. He's a professor and a student of yoga. And his thing is he really, anyone you're reading, you want to make sure they're commentating on the original commentary. They're not just making up fluff. Like I had a teacher once who wrote a version who just, I don't think she read any original commentary. And so it became this very westernized, fluffy kind of thing that I don't think is true to the tradition. And that's my job, is to the best I can, and Austin's job. And then when Amy and Rebecca and other people get in here teaching, their job is to the best we can, to the best we've learned it, is to be true to the tradition. You do with that what you will. But this is a fantastic one, but you can see, like, I'm not going to give you, and it's dense. I love it, but I don't know if my brain could have done this without doing smaller steps, and that's not to diminish your intelligence at all. This is a great one. It's it's going to be 4 volumes. It's each of the 4 chapters. This is, I'm going to say his name wrong, Pandit Rajmani Tigunite. I'm sure I'm slaughtering his last name. It's fantastic. It's from a different school of yoga. So it's I read it and I'm just like, how does this fit with what else I've studied? And I'm just pointing these out quickly. Like this one is also, do you know the Hare Krishna movement? Okay, their main guy wrote this version. So, you know, if any of you remember or have seen images in the 70s, like they'd be at airports and their heads are shaved and they'd be wearing the yellow robes. And it's a very religious tradition. It's a very, there's a strong belief in bhakti and God and things like that. So this version, when you read it, it's like God, 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 God. And that's okay. It's not incorrect, but I want to point out that this version isn't that way, and neither are these. And I won't go into any more, except that these 2 are also great. This one's fantastic. All right. And I have these here if you want to look at them when we take breaks today at all. I think it is a nice practice, like I said, just to read 2 in tandem, but also if it causes too much confusion, don't do it. Kathy.
I took a workshop that same day on the sutras and we read Sati Jananda.
Uh-huh.
And this is almost unrecognizable from that. I'm like, are these still sutras? Like they just seem very, very different to me. This one is very readable.
Yeah.
What we have now.
It's totally, it's not presupposing. This version compared to one that she took is just very readable compared to the Satchitananda one. And yeah, this one doesn't presuppose that you know anything. And yet it still can be kind of like, it still can be kind of, I don't know. How did the first 16 chapters feel? Were you like, ah, yeah. Or were you like, oh, goodness. Or kind of resonated some of it?
Yeah, I liked it. I thought it was like easy to read and digest.
Oh, good. Okay.
Yeah.
Easy to read and digest. Anything else?
There's a lot in there to digest, so I had to read a couple times. Like, what do you think? What do you think?
There's so much to digest. Yeah. So Amy was saying, Murray, she has to go back and reread, like, what do you say? What do you say? And yeah, and that's such a good thing to do when you're reading. Also know that as you read, then we'll talk about it. And hopefully that will when we talk in here, we're not going right out of this book. Cause what we're gonna do is bring in, just other ideas and things and try to elucidate whatever he's saying. Did I say that word right? Elucidate? It sounded all wrong. Okay, so, there's just lots of other yoga traditions. I'm not going to spend much time on that. You will learn about them in here though, because we're also going to study the Gita. There are some schools that study the sutras and the Gita. There's some that they're like, what are these sutras? Right? Or kind of like they don't necessarily do both. You also, in the mornings, your sadhana is very much based on a more hatha or tantrika practices, which do connect with this, but that's another story. They're not necessarily a part of that, not necessarily not a part of that. All of these yogas, though, they do have in common, like I said, that they are, what kind of philosophy did I say? Do you remember? Oh, my goodness, I didn't expect you to say that. That's awesome. They are based on Samkhya, and they're also, because we do the practices in them, they're a what? Practical philosophy. Yeah, you just went way into the deep end and I didn't expect it. Nice job. Yeah, they're practical philosophies. And there's always a specific aim, no matter what the yoga tradition is. Do you know what that aim is? Yeah, what's a word we could use that's an English word? Peace? Close. Calm, clarity. Ultimately, those are descriptions of the state of liberation. Yeah. And those are the things we feel along the way, along the path, as we're cultivating more and more peace. More, this term we'll use again later today, sattva. So we are trying to get liberation from what, though?
Suffering.
Yeah, suffering. Why? Just kidding. I assume you know that. So that is something they all share in common, including the sutras. And this is a text. Yoga is practical. This text is not necessarily practical. It's very actually theoretical. There's not a lot of do this, because it's assumed this was written for people who are studying the practices with a teacher. And then this is saying, here's why this is working. Here's what we're heading toward. This is like a map, and the teacher fills in the gaps with the practices and the commentary. I have a teacher who talks about the different yoga and other texts from India. And there are ones like this that are very, this only has 196 aphorisms, or what's called shlokas. Say that, that's fun to say, shlokas. Yeah, so each one of these little bold lines is a shloka, and there's 196 in here, which is not much when you think about everything that this tradition is. It's terse. There is not a sound, a syllable, anything that isn't placed there very intentionally and specifically. And so I have a teacher who compares the different texts and says some of them, like some of the bhakti poetry, which is bhakti is like devotional. It's like a wide open rose. You don't need anyone to interpret it. You read it and your heart just gets it, right? You kind of, if it talks to you, you understand it. And then there's ones where like that rose is starting to open, like the Gita, he says is this way. And the Gita, we're kind of like, yeah, there's analogies and there's things being said and repeated in here, but I could use a little more help getting this rose to open, this bud to open. And then there's this, and it's like tight little rosebuds. And that's why we need the commentators and teachers who are relying on good commentary to help us to open this up. the teacher is really who gives you the how-to. There's not a lot of how-to in this. Yeah, so you're not going to read it. You will with the later text, like you'll also be reading the Pradipika, which is a medieval text. It's much newer. It's a Hatha yoga text, and those tend to be more instructional, like do this pose for this, do this Mula Bandha for this. This isn't so much that way. It's assumed it's already happening in the school that's teaching it. Okay. So we talked about how old it is, lots of traditions, why we use this text, and part of what I want to say with the rosebud thing is that's why we need commentators, because I don't know, the first time I read the sutras, I was in a training and they literally gave us a Xerox copy that was a couple of pages long of 196 aphorisms. And Kathy talk about small text. Like, I don't know, they fit it on like a couple pages and we just had to read them and like check it off. And I read it in like, I don't know, 15 minutes and was like, okay. Yeah, I'm like, okay, it sounds kind of cool and I think I kind of get it, but this didn't have any impact. I don't know what to do with them. Where do I take this? How do I use this in my life? So back to just our goal is we want to not only get into the theoretical and the kind of big ideas, but ultimately to bring them around to, but what does this look like in our lives? And how can we use this to find more peace and happiness? Any questions or comments so far?
Texts just outright contradict each other?
Yeah.
Or are they all contradictory?
Well,
It's like-
the question is, do any of the texts outright contradict each other? I'm deciding if I want to take a bird walk. Yes, they do. I'm deciding if I want to say why. I do want to say why, but I'm going to get to it when we get to Sutra 1.2, okay? Ultimately, it's because they believe in slightly different versions of what liberation looks like. So that's the bias. And we'll talk about, if you're interested in it, we'll talk about what those different versions of liberation are. What else?
What other traditions use the sutras? Like, what would be an example?
I mean, I don't like names, or
Yeah.
I mean, whatever Satchitananda school is, I can't remember it.
What's the difference?
Uh-huh. Yeah, like the Hare Krishnas. Oh, actually, this is Bhagavad Gita. What am I doing? Did I hold this up and have you go, huh? Yeah, sorry. I usually bring this in the Bhagavad Gita one, but this one is the Gita is a great example of how schools fight with each other, because the schools, to be considered one of the classical kind of schools in yoga, they have to have Gita commentary. So their commentary is always an argument against everyone else's.
Seems so contradictory.
Right?
Yeah.
I'm like, I thought we all got along in yoga. Nope. But you will find ones, oh, Edwin Bryant, for instance, is more of a bhakti yogi, more of a, he's in the Krishna tradition that really reveres Krishna. So even though he tries to take his bias out of it, he does tend to have a little bit of a more God bhakti devotion to a divinity kind of slant. And you'll just see, and some don't have that at all. Did I answer your question?
You did, thank
Okay.
you. When you approach these texts, you approach them like a religious text or like a scholarly academic text?
Well, the question is, do I approach? Are you saying me, or do I recommend others approach it that way?
I think your
Me?
specific-
Do I approach it as a religious text or more scholarly? And I would say I approach it as a practitioner. So to me, as a practitioner, yoga is not a religion. It can be used to support religion. And the sutras, very specifically, there's sutras that talk about God and the Lord. And it's very much believed, Me and my bird walks. Okay. There's stuff I'm gonna say and just don't even worry about it. If you enjoy it, great. If not, zone out for a minute. Go offline for a second. But there is really interesting stuff out there about how he was very likely, Patanjali was very likely a follower of Shiva, and if not Krishna, because those are the two big followings at this time, and it would be so rare for someone not to be of one of those. There were smaller ones than maybe those, but no doubt he had some leaning toward a certain god, and yet he doesn't say that god's name once. Kind of cool. And it's very intentionally done, because it's like, hey, who's your god? Okay, great, come on in. So I don't take a religious view of it. I do appreciate, to an extent, both. I like the commentary that is from people who straight up, they're not academic. They are from India or from a tradition, and they've been studying it since they were wee little babies. And then I also like to read versions where it's more academic, but I always want to make sure the person's a practitioner too, because when it just gets academic, they're losing it. They're missing what it's all about. Which I do love about Edwin Bryant, because he's both.
Are you writing one?
Oh, no. Hell, I almost said hell no. Oh, I don't think it's, no, but that's very sweet of you to say. Maybe in 50 more years of study, I might do that in my 90s or something, very late 90s at this point. Anything else? Okay, I have you till 12:30. I was thinking I'd take a break at about the halfway point. Are you good to keep going till then? Are you feeling? I mean, we've been at it 36 minutes, but I also know this stuff can be kind of heavy, and not heavy, but just academic-y. Yeah, you're good? Okay. Then we will keep going. Amy, do you have any questions or anything you want to add?
I don't, I just want to get into it.
All right, let's get into it then. So, will someone go ahead and have your book out, and we'll read just as we're going through, have it open to the sutra we're going to talk about, because I would at least like to have someone, until we really get flying toward the end when I run out of time, I'll probably read them real fast. But will someone read Sutra 1.1, please? And you can raise your hand or just say it. No, just the sutra, just the bold part. Yeah, thanks, Hannah.
Now, the exposition of yoga.
Yeah. Now, the exposition of yoga. Like, okay, so what? You know, I talk about this one in 200 hour, and I think it's worth a little discussion here. The sutra in Sanskrit is, let's practice this one. This is one thing I don't like about this text. I wish the Sanskrit was right there. You have to flip to a different section to find it. And I don't like that about it, but we're just gonna kind of phonetically, I didn't write it on the board today. I usually would, but I didn't. We're gonna say each word. We're gonna talk a little about what it means and why this sutra is pretty cool and why I think it could be a touchstone for you. Here's where we get into the practicalness of it. I know you're gonna make me yawn. I did not sleep great last night, so let's hope my brain holds out, you guys. But yeah, I think this one can be used in a practical way, even though it just sounds very boring. Now, the exposition of yoga. So atta is the first word. Say that. Atta. That means now. Yoga. That means, yeah, yoga. Mari's like, yoga? Yes. Anushasanam. Anushasanam. So this means exposition. It also means discipline.
Mm.
Should we try this? Let's try this. Hatha yoga, nushasanam. The end of yoga and the beginning of the other word blur into one. So then it becomes, okay, I'm going to say it and then I'll repeat it with you. Hatha yoga nushasanam. Hatha yoga nushasanam. That's kind of fun. And the thing about Sanskrit is it is the thing itself. Let me repeat that. It is the thing itself. So when I say Melissa's name, it's a label. Does the word Melissa have any, I mean, maybe slightly it shaped who you are. Maybe there's some weird way our names shape who we are and how we feel in the world. But by and large, you are you, whether you were called Melanie or Melissa, right? Melissa is not the vibration of your vibration at its essence, okay? Sanskrit in yoga philosophy, which is the underpinnings are Samkhya, which we will get to, things start at they actually start at what's called a pre-vibration and then a vibration, and then they get densified and turn into the world we're in. Edwin Bryant uses the word grossified and densified a lot. These things get heavier and they start, I kind of hate to use the word manifest because of how it's used in the West, but they start to manifest. They start to come into what we would call being, into the world around us. And they start at a pre-vibrational level that becomes vibration. And then here we are. Sanskrit is that vibration, according to this yoga and other traditions. So when we say Atha, we aren't just saying, we're not just making a sound that labels the concept of now. We are vibrating the essence of now. Right? So say and it is in cup. Ta. Ta. There's kind of an aspirated H. Ta. And do you feel how there's like this ta? Right? So we can even almost hear it. It's this birth. There's a little break at the top where there's life and then death. It contains in these couple little sounds, it contains everything that is now. And therefore, this word, Baba Hari Das, one of my teachers is a nun in his tradition. He started, which I don't tell you any of this. I've had teachers who were like, so I studied with. No, that's not why I'm doing this. The reason I'm doing it is because I am not an expert, Lori. That's why I'm not going to write a text, but I want you to know the stuff I'm telling you comes from people who know their stuff. Okay. Baba Hari Das, if you've heard of Mount Madonna in California, he's the monk who started that. He he took a vow of silence that lasted decades and decades and decades, and yet he still managed to transmit his teachings. He wrote a lot. This is the first version of his Yoga Sutras. But one of the things he says is Atha is in Indian tradition and yoga tradition, it is a blessing. It's a word that's a blessing. It's like Om. You say it and it's got whatever that vibration of now is, it's a blessing for you and to be heard. So it's kind of cool. It's just kind of this reminder to, yes, be in the now. And it starts with a blessing. And yeah, it's just a cool one. I want to say a couple of other things about it. Pandit Rajmani Tingle, I'm not sure how to say his last name. He says in this commentary about this sutra, to be born as human is the greatest achievement, right? So according to yoga, you've earned it. You've worked toward it. It's like, there's a thing about, it's as rare and unlikely for you to get to be in your life as it is to like throw like a lifesaver into the ocean. And at that moment, when it lands, have a seal pop its head up and right through the center. That's how unlikely it is for you to be here now in your life. So what a gift. It's the greatest achievement. And to die without knowing the essence of life is the greatest loss. So it's this reminder that when we're studying this stuff, this is our chance to live up to that achievement, to the heights of being human, to the best stuff we can do. And now begins the study of that. This is a call to be like, hey, like you get to do this. It's not a have to. It's going to be hard. It's going to take work. It's going to take discipline. But oh my goodness, not only are you here as that little seal that popped its head up through the lifesaver, but your parents were, and that had to happen for you to be. I mean, it gets the odds of you being here get just astronomically impossible the more we go down this road. Your great-grandparents, every single choice each one of them made before your grandparents were born could have taken them down a completely different path and you would have never been here. So like this Atha Yoga Nushasanam is a call like, hey, get with it. We are so privileged to be studying this. Like what a joy and what a privilege to even be human. And now let's rise up to the challenge. Because what a shame to have this opportunity here in front of us and to miss it, to not really study it and go deep with it, and to get that essence of what life is. So I love this, and I think it can be possibly for you, one to memorize in the Sanskrit so that you actually bring in that vibration of it. Again, for those times when you're just like, because it happens, like over 9 months, work, life, all of these things happen. And we can get to a point where we forget and I never mean privilege, like you're so lucky to be here with me. I mean, the privilege of any of us getting to study yoga is amazing. First off, how many people get to study yoga in all of time and history? Because guess what? And this is a whole other conversation around appropriation, but that said, prior to about 150 years ago, you would not have been here studying yoga, even if you were you, which would have been impossible 150 years ago, but let's let that go, right? Like unless you were born in a time and in a culture and in a caste and with the right body parts, you wouldn't have been allowed to study this stuff. You wouldn't have had the opportunity. And so now, like, I mean, the amount of people in time and history who've gotten to study this, it's such a small amount. So keep that in mind. And this is really a call to like, be like, yeah, like I'm going to bring some discipline, some enthusiasm, a little bit of zeal to it. Being able to read, being able to afford to do something like this, I mean, just so many things. I mean, we could go down it just in our country, a social justice road, right? I mean, it's just unbelievably amazing to get to do this stuff. Okay. I would like to, does anyone have comments on that one or anything you want to add or ask? Yeah, Tim.
Yeah, I have a slightly, I don't know, I won't say different, but interpretation of that.
Uh-huh.
And that now is the time to study yoga. Now is now. I mean, it's not yesterday, it's not tomorrow. Now is physically now.
Now.
It's not opportunity, it's just don't put it off. You're doing it right now.
Right. Well, and that's it too. Yeah. Now is now. Tim was saying it's like don't put it off. It's not necessarily, but it is the opportunity brings you to this now in which you have that opportunity. And yeah, don't put it off. Yeah, that's great. Thank you. That's definitely it. Anyone else did this? Yeah, Ryan.
We're kind of what's saying. I like to use it as like every moment is an opportunity to return back to the yoga. Like
Yeah,
I'm all jacked up in the head and having a hard time. Now,
now.
this is the best time. Like now is like
Do
you
the
gotta
yoga
get it
now.
together, do the yoga now, and like how that really starts to take it off the mat a lot.
Yeah, I love
I'm
that.
here to be doing the yoga, not just the asana.
Yeah, doing the yoga all the time. And that is too, depending on what I decide to talk about. Sometimes I talk about in 200-hour Atta, and the idea of now also Patanjali takes us right into the deep end. So some people think it's just really no coincidence that the first word is Atta, and that it's the vibration. And now, because it's like, if we really get that, we don't need the other sutras, because the next one's going to tell us to get our vrittis the heck under control, right? But if we're here now, our vrittis are our thoughts, our mental modifications are under control. And so then it's like, yeah, it's just this reminder. And when we vibrate even that sound of Atta, it can support us with that too. And it's actually getting to your teaching practice. I like to use it, when I was teaching classes, I often taught it as a theme and taught people, as you inhale silently, say and as you exhale silently, ta, and just helping students, and the simple theme of now. And yet it's so hard. And thus 195 more to go. Are we good to hop into 1.2? Yeah, okay. So this is another one. If I'm gonna guess everyone in here's heard, and I think it's worth revisiting. Yogesh, go ahead. Yogesh. And by the way, it's just yoga, but the next word is chitta, so they blur, so it becomes yogesh chitta. Say that, yogesh chitta, vritti. Yeah, and there's a tiny bit of a tongue roll, vritti. Yogesh chitta vritti. Yeah, it's fun, right? Be willing to get it wrong. That's okay. Try it. And then Nirodha. Nirodha. Yogesh chitta vritti. Nirodha. Okay, let's try the whole thing. Yogesh chitta vritti nirodha. Yogesh chitta vritti nirodha. And again, because Sanskrit is the thing itself, it sure doesn't hurt to try to say these things too, right? And that's traditionally how they would learn, is they would actually learn it and memorize the whole thing and do a whole chant. And a lot of the information through the other practices supporting the chanting then and the Sanskrit, would be downloaded without you wouldn't need a lot of teacher exposition on it as much. You still would, but so yogash chitta vritti nirodha. Yoga is yoga. Yeah. Chitta. Does anyone remember that one? The mind stuff. Yeah, which is, and remember this, so mind, so as things in yoga, as things start to come into being, they start at a very subtle level and they get densified and grossified. So essentially the mind becomes the body. And that's why we don't, in Indian traditions, have a big mind body split. The body is born from the mind. We'll get into that a tiny bit more in a little bit. But when we say mind stuff, it's not just brain stuff. Okay. So yoga, mind stuff, chitta, and then vritti. Say that. It's just fun. Vritti. What are vrittis? Do you remember? Distortions, whirls, the vortexes or vortices. What's the plural? Yeah. It's whirling, it's a motion, it's sometimes called modifications. But whirl, like your fingerprint, that pattern, that movement is the direct translation, sometimes called waves. And then we have Nirodha, which is cessation, stopping. So yoga, we get our definition of yoga. Yoga is Nirodha. And what is Nirodha? It's the stopping of the mental modifications, the movements of the mind stuff. So again, that's all you got to do. Just stop it. It's important to remember that this is because what happens is the vrittis, the movements of that chitta, when it's moving, we become engrossed in it and we misidentify with the vrittis. We start to think we are the vrittis. And we get confused about who we really are. And in yoga, that's important. That's where we get this big divide. There's the small s self, Kathy, S. Now, I've had other people think that over the years, big S and small s, yeah. And so sometimes I'm like capital S. But the small s self is most certainly real in yoga, but it doesn't last. So it should only get so much attention. We need to put our sights on the big S self. And so when we get that, essentially, when we look at this, if you remember this analogy, or if you've heard it, the chitta being like a pond, right? And the vrittis are what? The movements, the ripples, right? The true self being a full luminous moon, trying to see itself, reflect its own reflection in that pond. While it's in the chitta, in the mind stuff, the only time it gets a clear reflection is when the mind is what? Still. And that also is what's so cool about yoga, because it's like you're whole and complete. You are this moon. You just need to stop confusing yourself for these vrittis that make you think you're this shattered, a little bit of light here, weird shape over here, dark, whatever, darkness, light, shattered thing that might be a moon, might not be. We don't know what it is. You're not that. You're whole, you're complete as you are. So yoga is subtractive. Yoga is not telling you you have to add anything to who you are. You instead need to remember who you are and take away the crap that's got you confused. When we do that, then, and I'm going to come back to the sutra, but I want to hop to the next one. 1.3 is, then the seer abides in its own true nature. So when we get that pond still, the seer, the moon, can rest in its own true nature. It's not confused that it's something it's not.
Can you distinguish between remembering who you are and discovering who you are? I've heard it said both ways.
Remembering who you are versus discovering. Yeah. And did you have more to say? It's confusing. Remembering suggests, it doesn't suggest. So in yoga, who you really, your big ass self, your the seer, is who you've always been and always will be. When you're here, you forget that because you're so caught up in vritti. So it's a remembering. When you, I don't think discover's wrong. I just think remember really gives us this idea that it's always been there and always will be there. There's just been stuff that's made us forget. We get caught up in vrittis, in movements of the mind stuff that confuse us and make us forget who we are. Vyasa, the original commentator, says there's 5 kinds of vrittis. You don't have to remember this, but I I want to let you know about them because I think this will also help with that question. And you can see some of them are very problematic. So the vrittis are disturbed, stupefied, distracted. Oh, and then we get to this one called one-pointed. Ah, okay, one-pointed. That sounds a little better than distracted. Sounds a heck of a lot better than disturbed, because it is. And then we get to perfectly controlled, which would be Narodaha. And the whole goal of yoga is to get these vrittis to slow down enough so we can actually choose them and control them. And a part of that's becoming one-pointed along the path before we have complete control. One-pointedness is a huge idea. It comes up again and again and again in the Gita, tons in the Gita, and somewhat in the sutras. And it's important because what the disturbed, stupefied, and distracted vrittis are doing is we get caught in the vrittis because we get caught in yum yucking. We're either chasing pleasure or avoiding pain. And this comes about because we've had experiences. So we get what's called a samskara, an imprint. And it starts as having experienced something once. So it's like stamping something in the clay. At first, it's a very light stamp. So let's say this is kind of a silly one, I guess, but let's say you've never had chocolate before. If the stimulus comes in of seeing a chocolate bar. So remember the pond, let's say someone throws in a rock, i.e. a chocolate bar. If you've never experienced chocolate bar before, you don't react to that stimuli or stimulus. It might be there might be smell and other stuff, but that rock, that stimulus can just sink to the bottom and not cause as much of a disturbance. You don't necessarily act on it. You don't do anything. But if you have the chocolate, it leaves a little imprint called a samskara. Then the next time that stimulus comes in, if you hated the chocolate, you remember that and it gets stirred up. And let's say maybe you say something rude to the person who offers it to you, but you act on that aversion because the vrittis, the samskara is like, oh, there's a memory here. I didn't like this, or I did, and give me that chocolate. Either way, it gets those vrittis moving, and then we act on the vrittis. And in all of that, we get terribly confused because we just go around the world yum yucking. We're either avoiding things that are uncomfortable that we don't like, this and that, or we're chasing things that feel good. And the thing is, neither one of those things lasts anyway. And both of them are going to bring pain. I'm sorry?
Oh, sorry. I was just saying, but we think our vrittis are true.
We think they're true. Yeah, we think, and we, so we're either, and we have these moments and it's like, the more we chase the pleasure, well, so say you just, and I'm not saying having chocolate's bad. I love chocolate. But give me a dark chocolate any day. But that's a samskara. That's each time I have it, I am pressing that stamp a little deeper into the clay. And it's that with everything in life. So if I, let me give you an example of aversion and how it can be a stamp too. If I had an experience I didn't like and I avoided it and it gave me a sense, I either didn't like it, that leaves a stamp not liking it. So if I have it again and I still don't like it, that stamp gets deeper and deeper. But also if I avoid it and, that can get deeper too, but maybe it's a hard conversation I need to have or something like that. I mean, certainly we have to do some hard things in life that we don't like to do. And so the whole point of our yoga practices is to get control of these vrittis and to become one-pointed. Once we become one-pointed, we're not yucking. We are focused on our goal of what? Liberation. And that means lots of things. That means consistently in the here and now, instead of being like, oh, I'm gonna, even though my blood sugar's been wacky this week and I know I shouldn't, I'm gonna eat that chocolate. And then I'm gonna be, when my blood sugar crashes because it spiked, then I'm gonna be a real crab with people I love. Instead, we're like, okay, let's be here now. Yeah, I see those vrittis. And even if you do choose it, it slows it down a little to where each time you have more choice. So we become more one-pointed until it becomes perfectly controlled.
What does the one jumping mean?
One-pointed means focused on liberation. Yeah. Hi. Come on in. This is Rebecca. I'm waiting. I'm going to do everyone's introductions after break because I wanted you and Amy to get everyone's names together. Great. So we haven't done them yet, but make yourself comfortable. We're only on Sutra 1.2.
Maybe I have a question on that one point in the.
Can I,
Oh, yeah.
real quick, Kathy, did I answer that for you?
Yes.
Okay. Amy,
So one pointed, that's a verti, correct?
it is a vritti because it's a movement of them. There's still mental modifications happening.
And then could you say one pointedness could be ego-minded selfishness and that one pointedness?
Not this kind of one-pointedness, no.
One pointed on God.
Ego, well, you could call it God. It's just, it's liberation. It's the yogic path. It's the whatever. If God is your avenue for that, yes.
Is it liberation from your own suffering or all suffering?
That's another discussion for another day. It's liberation from suffering. And ultimately your liberation supports everyone's. So yes, to both.
That's where I was going with.
Mhm.
It seems sort of egoish minded with one pointedness.
Well, and that's where we'll get into Dharma later and talk about some other things, because it's really not, you can't, there is a difference when if you're chasing liberation in order to, there is this kind of catch-22 where it's like you want to avoid the pain of suffering. So there is a slight aversion and there is a slight, liberation is going to feel better, but it's a very different, it's one-pointed, and that doesn't mean you avoid hard things that you still have to do that would be dharmic. And that's the difference, is that when we're following Dharma, there is always a higher purpose. Our purpose is always to contribute to the higher good of all. And that includes ourselves. And I don't want to spend too much time on the one-pointedness. That will come up a lot more, especially with the Gita. But I do want to point it out here is that these vrittis, so to go back to the question about memory and things, vrittis, we get in this world where we just absolutely yuck everything and it becomes our whole personality. Right? Like, well, I don't like that. Or, oh, I love this. Or, oh, this is what I believe. Or I don't, it just becomes a lot of polarity. And then we think we are that. And what we have to do is remember, which also a remembering is to put back together that shattered moon, take the parts, member it. And we remember that we're whole. And when we do that, the seer abides in its own true nature. Yay. So what questions do you have? And then we'll take a break. Yeah.
Just like, can I talk about what Amy brought up?
Please.
Like, I've been thinking about it a lot, trying to like step past the ego and stuff, like, or try to figure out how to, not feel like I'm self-centered and stuff. And I think part of it is recognizing that the ego is made of multitudes of vrittis. It's not just one vritti that makes me who Ryan is.
Yeah.
Like, there's so many, like the anger that I go through or the love that I go through, those things make up my ego. Whereas like the moon reflecting in the water, that's just one.
Yeah,
adjustment.
Exactly.
So I can't just focus on my ego, because my ego is always like.
who knows what the ego is? Yeah, yeah. I love that, Ryan, too. Did you hear that, Mari? Could you hear that? Yeah, okay. I love that too, because that's gonna be a perfect segue into Samkhya philosophy. It's almost like I planted you in the audience with that. Thank you for that. Because that is really one of the big differentiations between the capital S self and the small s self. And we'll get into that. We'll get into that later more.
I think you're gonna have to start saying capital.
I learned it, yeah, it's just, but it's also kind of funny. What else before break? Yeah, Mari, yay, hi.
Okay, so vrittis, we're trying to like control them, or are we trying to like kind of like ride the wave of it, but notice that we are like in a vritti, you're like experiencing that. And then is like the atta what helps you bring you out of that?
Yes, all of that. But ultimately, here's what I want to say. At first, one of the steps, and we'll get into this more, I think it's the next one, we'll talk about something called Pratipaksha Bhavana, which I just talked about with, where's you guys, I need to stop.
Oh, in our class.
You people, yeah,
Oh,
you
yes,
folks.
yes.
Yeah, but there's things, Patanjali talks about specifically that it's like there's also kind of these steps along the way. So ultimately, we need to just stop the damn vrittis. But in the meantime, we need to get better about choosing our vrittis. And our yoga practices are all geared to slow down that chitta enough to where there is a gap between stimulus and response. So when that rock comes in the pond, when someone throws in the chocolate and you're like, chocolate, there's a gap. And you may be like, okay, I think I need to eat a meal first and then I'll see if I can handle the sugar. Maybe that's the path you take. Or maybe you're like, I'll have that chocolate and 5 more. But you've slowed down enough to be like, oh, there's a vritti. Either way, that is a slowing of the mind and it's going to help. There's one that's going to help more. There's a more helpful vritti to pick. But even when you pick the one that causes you pain and suffering, we're slowing down the mind enough to reflect on that and to be like, oh, yoga is the art of personal responsibility. It's not the art of like rainbows and glitter. It is so boring in some ways because it's just being like, oh, I did this thing and it led to this thing. So next time I'll try to be more mindful and it slows you down enough. And maybe next time you see you're about to make that choice and you still make that choice. But eventually you slow it down enough to where you're like, okay, just this time I'm going to make this other choice. And then that other choice starts to get more strength. So there is this art of slowing it down so we choose better vrittis. Ultimately, we need to overcome all the vrittis, but there's more helpful ones like being one-pointed. And then there's these not so helpful ones. Please.
I just think that it starts with acknowledgement, like we can say stop while the deal. You have to acknowledge that you're having them.
Yeah.
To begin with.
Absolutely.
It starts with acknowledgement.
Yeah.
That's just
Step 1, acknowledgement. If you can't just acknowledge. I feel like that could be our little slogan. Please, yeah.
So, talking about cause and effect,
Mhm.
so like, when I was young, my parents did things that I don't do,
Mhm.
because I saw the effect.
Yep.
So, did I experience their ripples and the effect, or did I see it in the pond and then don't want to do that? Like, so. You can learn from other people's.
You can learn from other
routines.
people's, but it's going to kind of depend on what samskaras you already have in your karma. So it's a really complex question you're asking. Her parents, did you hear it? Okay. And I'm just gonna, because of that, I'll say yours will also get answered in later discussions. But what I will say now is it just depends. If you in yoga, there's no way of getting around the idea of reincarnation. You can take it or leave it, but in yoga tradition, we have to have reincarnation because we have so much karma, and karma forces us back into life because it's a law of cause and effect, right? If you have these deep patterns, let's say you had, and I'm not saying you did, but you had a mom who shamed you about something, like maybe as simple as your hair color, right? And you already were coming in with some scars of feeling less than and not good enough. But it makes me feel powerful when I shame others, then you might be more likely to take on your mom's samskara and do that to your children. But if you come in with slightly different samskaras, that's the thing yoga says is you can build helpful samskaras. So there's an idea that kind of can make your mind go around and around that if you are doing yoga in this life, it's because you've been introduced to yoga in another life. So it's some good, helpful samskaras and karma. So what is possible is that, you just get to kind of work through a little karma, but you've done enough work in other lives and built up enough helpful patterns that you don't fall prey to that kind of conditioning of the mother or the father doing certain things. And that's why people wind up taking some people repeat it and some don't. Yoga would just be like, that's the reaction to the samskaras, and what you're coming into in this life is different than someone else, even if your circumstances seem the same. But we'll talk about that a lot more. There will be maybe not that question specifically, but around it, the ideas around karma, all of this stuff. Let's take a break.
That was an awesome question.
That was. Are we good to come back at 11? Or would 11:01 be too weird? 11:01, I'll give you a full 15. Okay. All right, we'll see you in a bit. We will start standing. You've still got a minute, but that's my way of saying don't get too comfortable yet.
Don't forget to record.
I just kept it going, but thank you. Yeah, my videos might annoy you because I record during the breaks because I absolutely, unless I have like someone telling me to record it, we won't get the second half. Okay, so to get a little bit of movement and so Amy and Rebecca can get to know your names. We're just gonna do a silly little thing. There's a longer version. Yeah, actually, I think we have time. Take a minute before we do this and just come up with a silly movement, less than 1 second. It can be this, it could be this. I don't care what it is. Okay, just in your head, do that. You got it? Okay. And we'll just go around, and what we'll do is I'll start and I'll say, my name is Amber. And you'll all say, hi, Amber. So, get it? But then we're gonna build on with the names. And I'm gonna have to get behind the camera so Maury can see what we're doing. But we'll build on and then we'll say, hi, Amber, hi, Rebecca, and so on around. And I think just that little bit of movement and silliness will probably be good for us. We'll see. So, hi, my name is Amber. Hi, Amber. Okay, and then let's actually start with Maury, if you don't mind, Maury. Are you good to go next?
Hi, I'm Mari.
So you'll say hi. Actually, we're gonna build.
Oh,
First we do
Hi, Amber.
Amber and Maury. Okay. Rebecca.
Hi, I'm Rebecca.
So hi.
Hi, Amber. Hi, Mari.
Did we get Rebecca? So you go Amber, Maury, Rebecca. Okay. Okay, sorry. This is gonna be, I used to do this with fifth graders. Come on.
Okay, hi, I'm Tiffany.
All right, so hi,
Tiffany.
Amber.
Oh, Amber first.
Hi, Mari.
Hi, Tiffany.
All right, we're getting it.
Hi, I'm Adam.
Okay, hi.
Hi, Tiffany. Hi, Adam.
That's a good one, Adam. Oops, it doesn't help if I put my finger in front of that. Okay.
I'm Lori.
Hi, Amber.
Hi, Marty. Hi, Rebecca. Hi, Tiffany. Hi, Adam. Hi, Lori.
I like the kicks there. Okay.
Hi, I'm Kathy.
Hi,
Amber.
Hi,
Hi.
Hi, Rebecca. Hi, Tiffany. Hi, Adam. Hi, Lori. Hi, Kathy.
I'm Sebastian.
Hi, Amber.
Hi,
Hi.
Marty.
Hi. Rebecca.
Hi, Tiffany. Hi, Adam. Hi, Lori. Hi, Kathy. Hi, Sebastian.
Gotta have a little disco if we're gonna do this, right?
Hi, I'm Shawan.
Hi, Rebecca. Hi, Tiffany. Hi, Adam. Hi, Lori. Hi, Kathy. Hi, Sebastian. Hi, Shawan.
All right. Now I'm gonna say after Tim, I want you to see if you can go a little faster even. Yeah, we're gonna speed it up here. All right.
Hi, I'm Tim.
Hi, Hi, Tiffany. Hi, Adam. Hi, Lori. Hi, Kathy. Hi, Sebastian. Hi, Tim.
Oh, I like that one. Okay.
Hi, Amy.
Wait. I think.
Tiffany, hi, Adam, hi, Lori, hi, Kathy, hi, Sebastian, hi, Sean, hi, Tim, hi, David.
I knew Amy was gonna challenge you, some kind of lunge or something. Hannah, all right.
Hi, Lori, hi, hi, Tiffany, hi, Adam, hi, Lori, hi, Kathy, hi, Sebastian, hi, Sean, hi, Tim, hi, Amy, hi,
Well, I want to shake my butt like, oh, my name's Andrea.
Hi, Andrea.
Okay.
Hi, or hi, Lori, hi, Becca, Tiffany, hi, Adam, hi, Lori, hi, Sebastian, hi, Sean, hi, Tim, hi, Amy, hi, Anna, hi, Andrea.
Hi, I'm Melissa.
Sebastian, hi, Sean, hi, Tim, hi, Amy, hi, Andrea.
Okay, so the next one, like, getting a little bit into your zone 2 cardio here. I'm gonna challenge you to just say hi before Amber and then just go through the names. So last 3, let's see how fast we can go. And then you're done with this foolishness, so enjoy it.
So you'll just say
just
hi.
say
Hi, Amber, and then it'll just say, hi, Amber, Maury, Rebecca. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Kara.
Amber, Lori, Rebecca, Tiffany, Adam, Lori, Kathy, Sebastian, Sean, Tim, Amy, Andrea,
Melissa.
Kara.
Those of you who give us a little, I'm doing it. No, but it's nice. Those breaks are nice.
I'm Ryan.
Amber, Mark, Rebecca, Tiffany,
Adam, Lori, Kathy, Sebastian, Sean, Tim,
Amy,
Hannah, Andrea,
Melissa.
Kara.
All right, last round.
Hi, I'm Amy.
Amber, Rebecca, Tiffany, Adam, Lori, Kathy, Sebastian, Sean, Tim, Amy, Hannah, Andrea, Melissa, Kara, Robbie, Amy.
Okay. Wow. Yeah, now some plank. We're gonna talk the sutras while you hold plank. I thank you for indulging me in that. I just think it's nice to get some movement, and I suspect by now, if Rebecca and Amy didn't know your names, they will always, if they forget your name, they'll at least be like, hi. And you. Okay. So. Catch your breath. Good work. Let's do a tiny review. I'm not going to do much, but because I want to hop into Samkhya. What's the goal of liberation is the goal of? Okay. What are we trying to get liberated from? Okay. What causes suffering? Specifically our we think we are we misidentify with them. Yeah. Good. And so yoga is trying to slow down the vrittis enough to where we at times actually have them stopped in arodaha, but also when we're in the world operating and we've just got vrittis going on, we're slow enough to where we can make different decisions about the vritti, how the vrittis determine our actions. Yeah. And that means less yum and yucking. And hopefully just also bringing an awareness to when we're yum and yucking. which sounds like not much, but it took a lot of talking, huh? Okay, we will hop into Samkhya now, and then we will get the rest of these sutras done. So the sutras will move relatively quickly, and I think we'll take about 20 or so minutes on this Samkhya stuff. So you have this map, and Mari, I know it's hard to see, but it's just the Prakriti map that you have. Yeah, that's it right there. So Samkhya is the underlying philosophy for most Indian traditions, not all, but it is, so any ideas about how the world works, how liberation works and everything else like that, there's this underpinning of Samkhya. It's in the Gita. So you'll hear words that we're going to talk about today in the Gita, as well as in the sutras. So we really need to start to get our heads around this if we are going to take proper consideration of these texts, right? And the texts are written assuming you already kind of know this stuff to an extent. So Samkhya actually means to count or enumerate. And it's because what it's doing is this map you have called the evolutes of Prakriti. You'll notice there's 25 steps, and so Samkhya is actually counting the steps from consciousness to being you. And there's 25 little iterations along the way. We will look at those today. We won't get into all the ones on the bottom row other than to just be like, they're there. But we will take a little time with these others. So Samkhya is generally considered a dualistic philosophy. There are some people who would argue otherwise. I'm not going to go down that path. I just want to acknowledge it. By dualism here, what we mean is that there is this split. There is Purusha and Prakriti. Well, what the heck are those two things, right? Essentially, you could simplify it and say big S self, little s self. Okay, so Purusha is over here, and it is the true and abiding nature that when we say the seer rests in its own true and abiding nature, the seer is Purusha. How do we know what, and Purusha has other terms, synonymous, that we'll talk about tomorrow. We'll get into that more. But Purusha is described in some texts as being Satchit Ananda, so truth, awareness, bliss. You might remember that. Of course, we're just humans trying to describe the indescribable, right? But Patanjali says, well, hey, let's measure it. There's 3 ways to measure if something's Purusha or not. So the first, excuse me, is it pure? This is what Ryan was just saying. Purusha is in and of itself only Purusha. When we get into the other side of things, which is Prakriti, Prakriti at its most basic always consists of 3 things that are woven together in different ratios. And I'll get into that in a minute. So Purusha is just Purusha. Prakriti is much more complicated. The other 2 measures are that Purusha is eternal. So if we want to say, well, is this Prakriti or Purusha? Well, has it always been and will it always be? If the answer is no, then it's Prakriti. So that's even like a thought, a feeling, anything that that is not always is not Purusha. The other thing is it's unchanging. Purusha does not change. So it's good to have these measures because it's like when we think we have had moments where we identify with the true and abiding self, there is a sense of that self being only in and of itself. It is eternal. There's a sense of that eternity or eternalness. and that unchangingness. It's not subject to whims. It's when we say Satchitananda, that last word Ananda means bliss. And it's not, it's an actually being, it actually is bliss that never changes, that just always is, rather than the experience of joy or bliss, which can come and go. Excuse me. So everything else is Prakriti. When you read this text and you see like seer, or the capital S self, that's Purusha. That's Purusha. And the more we slow down the vrittis, the more we see that moon, that big luminous moon in the pond, the more we remember that Purusha. To get back to how we know the yoga is working, is we become more and more peaceful. Well, why is that? It's because we are developing more and more of one of the three strands. So, and excuse me, the three strands that make up everything in Prakriti are called gunas. I don't have this word up here, but it actually came up in your reading even. I think this last bit of reading you did had someone mentioned some gunas, Gunas. The gunas are the three constituents of Prakriti, of everything that's not Purusha. On your map, it says, and if you two want those, this is what I have for them. It says matter, but understand this, where it says matter next to Prakriti, it is matter in this context is even subtle matter that nothing, and even the best microscope could never pick up. It's subtle vibration, it's pre-vibration of vibration, okay? But all of that still consists of the gunas. And these three are braided together in different amounts to create the different things. So the one we are working on cultivating more of is called sattva or sattva, you'll sometimes hear. W or V, just depends on the part of India the person's from. Sattva actually translates as beingness. Its qualities, it's light, it's harmony, it's, like Austin said last night, clarity, discernment. It's all of these, it's wisdom. I think clarity and light are really good words. It's often represented by the color of white. Because that just means it has the least saturation of Prakriti. So it is the most reflective of Purusha. It's the most harmonious guna. So the first step, and I'll get to the other two gunas in a moment, but you'll see this first step under Prakriti, number 3 is Mahat or Buddhi. This is a translation could be the wisdom mind. Or it is a part of yourself that's not, it doesn't feel, it's not awareness of any separation yet even from Purusha. It's in the Prakriti, but it is mostly consisted of sattva. It is mostly, and some people would say all, light. So it's this harmonious guna, this harmonious strand. And it is the most direct reflection of Purusha. As long as we're in the Prakriti side of things, without just being Purusha, right? Is when we're in this, it's when that pond is still. And we're seeing that reflection of the moon as accurately and perfectly as we can while it's a reflection. Okay? So it's not the moon itself, but it is the most clear reflection of the moon. The next step down, or next tattva, excuse me, is called ahamkara. And aham always means I am, and kara is maker. So it's the I maker. And this is the next iteration of Prakriti. I may need to ask a favor if someone could you give me water? I'm sorry to ask that. I just don't think I'm gonna make it through this. I guess tea's not helping. So the eye maker is where we do start to become aware there is separation. Not just between the self, the small self and Purusha, but an awareness of separation between other also. But this is a little more on that Purusha Prakriti level, but it comes down and results in separation between you and me and whatnot also. Yes, Tim.
That
Thank-
I is in capital I
Yeah.
as opposed to,
Yes, thank you. As in capital I, as in me.
and Kara is maker.
Yeah. Yeah, so
You're
the,
making yourself.
you're making yourself, which is funny, right? And kind of one of the brilliant examples of Sanskrit. Because it is this idea of Purusha experiencing itself in Prakriti and making itself separate. Why it does that is a whole other story that we'll kind of gets into it in the sutras. But at this point, we're just understanding this is the theory of how we come into kind of being from our essential nature being pure, unchanging, and eternal truth, bliss, and awareness. So ahamkara, this is where we start to get a lot of what's the guna called tamas, Tamas. It's all that short A sound, it's tamas. And tamas is often represented by the color black because this is the most saturated with Prakriti, it's the most, if we imagine these gunas are, it's like a film between us and seeing what Purusha really is. Like sattva is the clearest film on the window or whatever separating us. Whereas tamas would be like your light blocking curtains. Okay. Tamas is just completely separated. It has no sense of that. And so therefore its qualities are dullness, inertia, which just means there's an ability to move, but it's not moving yet. Depression, and I don't mean to say, I do want to be clear when I'm talking about any of this. None of this means, oh, you're depressed, just take care of that tamas guna. Like, no, that's not what we're talking about, but a depressed individual certainly would be working through a lot of tamasic gunic vrittis and stuff. So it's a heaviness, it's dark, it's heavy. And that's because this is the first, I mean, really the first confusion comes in the fact that we start to think we're just ourselves. And we, at this point, have forgotten Purusha as we've become the I. Right? It's just, we're in a little, here's our vrittis, here's small s self instead of this. So, hi, welcome. And then this just, then we start to form, it doesn't matter what's on what side where, I don't want to get into that, but the mind starts to form. It's called manas. And from the mind, then we have the Jnanendriyas, which are the 5 cognitive senses, the Karmendriyas, which are the 5 active instruments, expressing, grasping, so on. I'm not going to get into all of those. I'll come back to mind in a moment. From tamas, directly from ahamkara, we get the tan mantras, which are the subtle elements, sound, touch, so on, and the bhutas, earth, water, fire, air, and ether. And this bottom layer is what all comes together to make your human form. But remember when I said your form is born out of your mind? Well, let's go back one step. What's the fifth one up here? Mind. Okay, and this is going to include all your samskaras, all of your memories, your impressions, your fears, your hopes, your karma is an influential factor in this, all kinds of things. So what we're doing through yoga is we're essentially trying to unwind our chitta and get it to the state of mahat or buddhi. And I forgot to talk about rajas, but let me just say that we're trying to settvasize the mind. So when I say we're trying to learn to slow down the mind, I don't mean make it tamasic and heavy. It actually has a lightness and a clarity, but it's kind of like, you know, in a movie where things are happening fast, but the main character, for whatever reason, it slows down and they see a bullet going this way and and they're like catching bullets or they're whatever, like that's kind of more like sattva is like, there's still this process, there's still things happening, but there's just this like clarity and wisdom to it that we are trying to get back to in this mahat or buddhi mind, where we get the most direct reflection of Purusha. Tamas obscures it the most. Rajas comes into play. Rajas is represented by the color red, and it's kind of the step in between sattva and tamas. It is like, whereas sattva is maybe the window itself that the light of Purusha is coming through. And if we have tamas being these light blocking curtains, then, or blackout curtains, whatever they're called, then tamas is some kind of blind or curtain or sheer. So they're still in rajas. Rajas is movement. It is action. And you can see it starts to happen down in the body and through the mind, because what's happening is down in there, then we start to get what I was just talking about. We start to have a stimulus come in. We have a memory of it that makes us either go yum yuck, and then we act. Right? We go, oh, I'm going to get that thing, or oh, I'm going to avoid that thing and do this thing over here instead. One of the keys to yoga and getting more sattvic is slowing down that rajas enough to, of course, still act in the world, but make different choices, like we were talking about with our vrittis. So, rajas is connected to desire. In fact, its root word is raga. You'll learn this later too in the sutras, R-A-G-A rather than J-A-S. And that actually translates to desire. And that's just a hint at what we're talking about with this yum yucking, and how desire, whether it's desire to not experience something or to experience something, it compels us into action based on impressions and memories. So rajas and the mind in general, it is our vehicle. Through action, we can start to develop more helpful vrittis and karmas and actions in the world. Or we can just act and react and just be out in the world kind of doing who knows what, just reacting. Rajas kind of drive us either way. Swami Satchitananda, in his Bhagavad Gita commentary, they will all to some degree say this, but he says, he brings up a good point, is that, and thank you for this so much. It's funny because last time I was in here teaching, I got a weird cough, so maybe I'm allergic to something happening. But Swami Satchitananda says you can be tempted to, when you first get on the yogic path, to confuse tamas with sattva, because there's a certain stillness to both of them. But and you can be like, well, I'm just going to Netflix and chill today. And I'm not saying don't do that, and that self-care maybe doesn't involve some of these things, but you also know when you're just being like totally avoidant of life, right? And he's kind of talking about this, like when you don't know what to do, chances are you're tempted to be tamasic, so instead get rajasic. It's better to take action than to do inaction, because inaction is still action. And its consequences are even going to be harder to get out of. So that's just a little bit of advice he has. But what we're essentially doing then through our practices is trying to dispel some of that darkness and heaviness of tamas, becoming more sattvic. When we do use action, choosing action, so that we are more clearly getting into that mahata or buddhi mind to reflect Purusha. Eventually, we even unwind out of sattva. Final liberation, there's no gunas. It's completely returning to just being's a verb, and there's really no verb. We are Purusha, but it's that return to full realization of Purusha. So that's Samkhya. Please give me your questions.
What does it literally mean?
Samkhya means to enumerate or count.
Oh,
So it's actually counting these tattvas, which are steps or levels. Yeah, Amy.
so when you go back to like the metaphor of like, here's a birthday, you need to skill to then make the decision to choose a better decision. How would you put that into maybe you're an action rajas? Could the stillness be a tamas point to then get back to?
No,
Purusha?
tamas is always trouble.
Okay.
Tamas leads to ignorance. It leads to, it's just also being lazy in thinking. It's like believing things without doing research. It's, there's just we do not want tamas ever. At the same time, that's not totally true because we need to do things like sleep and whatnot. But whatever we do, we need this level of sattva to it. So we do need tamas to sleep. Like we need it for things like that. And we need bits of it to slow us down some, but we always are cultivating sattva. So when you're talking about the vrittis, ultimately what we are trying to do is just, as long as we're going to have vrittis and not just having them stopped, which is what Nirodha would be, which is then what is really another word for samadhi, which is our liberation, but as long as there's some of that vritti movement, mental modifications, we want them to get as pure and sattvic as possible. In sattva, there is still action, there's still rest, there's still all of these things, but it's with clarity, it's with discernment, so that we are creating better, and by that I mean more helpful karma for ourselves. We're creating samskaras that help keep us on the yoga path rather than take us from the yogic path. Did that answer your question?
So it's more sattva, and that I was trying to put that word to when you take that moment to stop.
Yeah.
And then you-
It's still gotta, like anything, even things, like there's still just a sattvic quality that we're trying to get the mind into at all times. So that, like Ryan was saying, there's always this sense of now. And when that's there, there's just this clarity that would be sattvic.
That requires consciousness.
Yeah, because you're still in prakriti. Depends how you're using the word consciousness.
So like if you vanity sleep,
Okay, so you mean waking versus sleeping.
yes, and then when you're awake, but the consequences of the lack of, in this case, Thomas, can cause sometimes a continuation of Thomas, it just cause you to be like, I
Yep.
didn't sleep well, I'm gonna be on the couch.
Yep.
Right, it's just like, so
Mhm.
your Rogers is not kicking in.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it just becomes a cycle. We just get into cycles, right? Or even if, and again, this isn't a blame game thing, but if you've ever been depressed to where you're like, I know some movement would help me, or I know I just need to get off the couch today, but I can't, like, and then it actually gets harder to do. Or if you've also been too rajasic, and you might know your own personality where you fall. Like if you're just like, I can't sit still, I cannot sit still, I've got to move, I got to go. Then and I'm gonna overschedule and I'm gonna like, Amy, are you a little Rajasic? You're interesting because I feel
I'm really learning the balance.
learning the balance, which would be Sattvic, right? But I just got a kick out of you talking about last night, like doing the, like being on your,
Yeah.
yeah,
the
like,
bike thing.
and there's nothing wrong with that. Again, like it's better to, in yoga, it's better to be Rajasic with purpose and trying to build the vrittis that help us become more sattvic. So, but there certainly we can go the opposite way where we just get reactive. I think that's, oh, let me say this about rajas. So remember how I said its root is raga, which is desire? Here's how you know you're being rajasic when you get frustrated. Because frustration is thwarted desire. Rajas is like, give me that. And when you're like, even in traffic and you're frustrated because your desire is to get to a place on time and you're pissed at yourself because you're running late or whatever the thing is, and traffic's in your way and you're like, ah, that's you being rajasic. Now, you're human, it's going to happen. But what yoga is doing is giving you that ability to zoom out and look at it as kind of a weather map. And instead of being like, I'm pissed, you can be like, ooh, there's some frustrated rajas. It's like a weather map, like there's a little storm over here. And that's what we start to do. And then, and for a while you still experience the storm. And then maybe you're like, okay, it's just a weather map. I'm gonna switch that storm with this, with some sunshine or whatever. That's what we're working on.
I have a question.
Yes.
When you're in movement and one-mindedness, like I do a lot of meditative movement,
Uh-huh.
is that sattvic? Because I'm not in a
Yes.
frustrated state.
Yeah.
I'm
Well,
just-
well, okay. Rajas isn't always frustrated because Rajas sometimes gets what it wants. But if there is a pursuit of the fruit of the action, it's rajas. And we'll get a lot more into that with the Gita, but if you're going after something for the result, so let's say and this is where we really want to watch our thoughts with yoga. Crap, I gotta get a move on. But you know, when we're on the mat, the vrittis we build, and there's a smaller thing called pratyaya, which I think that's the right word, which are actually thoughts, and they kind of coalesce into vrittis. Anyhow, I just say that because sometimes we say thoughts and vrittis are the same, and that's okay to do in here, but just know they're not exactly the same. But like any vritti or samskara you're building on the yoga mat is going to be stronger because you're doing yoga with it. So let's say your form of you're doing yoga, but you're not being sattvic when you're doing it. Instead, you're like, I'm doing this because I got to make my ass look this way in these pants. You may get what you desire, but you will also eventually lose that. Whether it's through old age, death, illness, something else. Yoga is a very, this is why I say a lot, it's not rainbows and unicorns, because yoga is a very pragmatic, realistic, sometimes painfully realistic view of the world, because it's like suffering happens. And it sucks, but as long as you're just pursuing the fruit of the action, you are going to suffer. And so that's really, Amy, how you know when you're just being purely rajasic is when you look at what is your intention. What's the real intention? Because, right, also sometimes we tell ourselves there's an intention, but it's a pretend intention. Or those other things get kicked up. And by the way, they do sometimes. Sometimes you're just doing whatever and you just find yourself reaching for the fruit of the action. And that's okay. But when you can start to zoom out and see you're doing it, then that happens enough to where then you start to eventually make other choices.
Just a clarifying question.
Sure.
So Samkhya's steps, those the 25 steps of
Becoming you, of going from Purusha to Tiffany. Yeah. And I mean, it's kind of hardcore, but it's kind of like, and here's how you unwind out of thinking, at least thinking you're just Tiffany, right? And like, this is the thing with yoga too. Liberation is I like to think that there is this, again, capital L liberation of small L liberation. And the beauty of yoga is we get small L liberations along the way. We may not be like self-realization in this lifetime where we're just like, I am Purusha. See y'all. I'm out of here, suckers. But we like Carrera says, we get more joy and more peace. And that's little liberations along the way. And that to me is what's, for me, I who knows? I don't want to just say no, it's not going to happen, but I doubt I'm going to get liberated in this lifetime. If I do, cool. But I don't expect it at this point. Just knowing myself at this point, right? But what I can hope for and what I do work toward is more clarity, more discernment, and more sattvic mindset, because it just brings more peace and joy. And in those moments where I don't pick sattvic choices, I at least take the responsibility of, oh, I did not choose that. Like I just made, that's another story. I don't think we have time for that bird walk, but I just like made it a kind of a stupid accidental purchase, and I had to, anyhow, I had to take ownership of it, and it was dumb. But it was not dumb. It was just that I was rajasic and kind of had to just being quick and like, I just want to get this done. And I did it, and I bought the wrong thing. And now I have to write to the company and be like, so would you consider an exchange? But if they don't, I'm not going to get mad at them. That's where then for me, the art of personal responsibility comes in. If they don't give me the exchange, like I'm the one who rushed things and didn't read the description. So. Okay. So Samkhya. What is our true and abiding nature called? Yeah. And what is everything else called? Prakriti. What is the mind that we are, there's two names for it, that we're trying to kind of get them into the state of mind. Yeah, it's called specifically Mahat or Buddhi, but it is comprised of the guna sattva. Yeah. Which is the guna that is the most obscuring of the light of Purusha? Tamas. And which one compels us into action? Rajas. Which one is driven by desire? Yeah. You got it. I know this is a big day. Let me just remind you, if your brain is starting to melt right out of your ears, it's okay. You'll scoop it back up and put it in and be fine. Just to say it's very normal at this point. Like I was saying, I mean, he just throws us in the deep end. This first 16 sutras take a ton, and you will leave here with more questions unanswered than answered. That's normal. That's normal. That's just because you're getting the big ideas today. Okay. We good to leave some, we're not really leaving Samkhya, but are we good to step into the lot? Yes.
So in Ahamkara, the two divisions, you go to the right or the left. Why, is there more explanation there? Of those
None
two?
that we need today.
Yeah.
Well, we're just probably not ever going to need that. The key thing is you understand the gunas and that we are the mind. Yeah. It's just kind of beyond the scope of what we're doing.
Is that deeper understanding to get down there?
No,
No.
that's what we want to get out of. And we're working our way away from that. We're trying to involute. That's the evolution. And we're trying to involute. We're trying to unwind out of that. Yeah. Okay. 1.4. So 1.3 was then, once we have Nirodha, once we've Nirodha'd ourselves, the seer sits in its own true and abiding nature. 1.4, the self appear, I hope I have his, let me just, will someone read 1.4, just the sutra itself, please?
At other times, the self appears to assume the forms of mental modification.
Yeah, so all it means is when we're not sitting in our own true and abiding nature with Narodaha happening, then we think we are the mental modifications. We think we are the vrittis. That's all it's saying, is that we're either realizing who we really are, or we're confusing our self as only being these vrittis. We think that's all we are. And yoga's saying, no, but you're more than that. You're more than that. What's the next one, please? 1.5.
There are 5 kinds of mental modifications, which are either painful or painless.
Yep. So now, by the way, in Indian philosophy, they love to break things down into like, there's like just so much, let's break this into the smallest bits and all the components. And that's what a lot of this is. I mean, you saw it here, right? And that's what a lot of this is going to be. So he's like, okay, so when you are in the vrittis, essentially there's 5 kinds. They're either painful or painless. Of course, painful ones lead us away from liberation. They lead us deeper into misidentification with the vrittis. The painless ones help us to just essentially not get into all that. I feel like career is kind of some of his talk about effect and category and stuff. That's great, but it's a little ancillary. So 1.6. Yes. Those are kind of also, those are more like states of mind. Yeah. That's Vyasa kind of talking, but then this is a different way to classify them. Yeah, there's just going to be tons of classifications for things. So the 5 are right knowledge, misperception, conceptualization, sleep, and memory. Yeah, that's what happens next. Yeah. So in fact, the first one mentioned here is right knowledge. In 1.7, the sources of right knowledge are direct perception, inference, and authoritative testimony. So here's what I want to say about that is, for you to know that something is a helpful vritti, it needs to meet the test of it. It needs to, basically, we want to measure it against all 3 of these things. Can we infer it? Can we get authoritative testimony? And can we have direct experience of it? And I say this because I think there's a lot of people making up their own meditations or paths to freedom or happiness. And in yoga, and I'm not saying that that doesn't work, right? You can get on YouTube and find anyone telling you, do this meditation or try this yoni egg or whatever it is. Sorry, I had to try to get a laugh out of y'all. And then these things may work, but yoga's saying, why mess around with stuff that we don't know if it works or not? Instead, let's get on this path where you can have direct perception because you're going to do the practices and experience it. And then you can also infer you're on the right path because you're going to get the signs. What's the signs? More peace, more calm, more joy, more discernment. So you can infer. And 3, it's backed up by authoritative testimony. The people who've climbed the mountain and been there, they've experienced all the levels of samadhi, have said, here's what it is. So you've got all 3 behind it, rather than just being like, well, this person on Instagram says to hold this crystal to my throat and da. And I'm not saying those are bad practices by any means. In fact, I like some of those things, but I am saying, this is what traditional philosophy says, is don't just do anything. A nice example to give you another idea of what these 3 things are is direct perception. If there is a fire on Pikes Peak and you are standing there and you're looking at the fire and there is no doubt it's a fire, that's direct perception. It's not a play of light on the water in the distance that, like the sunset on the water confusing you. It is fire. An example of inference of that is smoke from the fire. You see and smell the smoke. You're not confusing a plume of steam from a power plant as smoke. It's smoke on the mountain. Now, it's better to have direct perception of it, but you can also then infer it from the smoke. Authoritative testimony is you're trying to drive up to Pikes Peak, the road's closed, and a firefighter's there saying, no, there's a fire up there. Versus hearing gossip from a friend that there's a fire on Pikes Peak. And I think in our world today, this is very important. What's authoritative testimony in any matter versus who thinks they're an authority and they really aren't? Who are we really listening to? And does that also do inference and direct perception also bear this out?
Right, like, do they validate the authoritative testimony? Like, they're kind of checked for all.
Yeah,
all
they check each other off. Uh-huh.
Right, because that's one of my big questions, is like, okay, an authoritative testimony, or I'm thinking about books or texts, like, there are so many that are not, in my opinion, right, like, not that great, but that you could be like, oh, that's authoritative testimony. But then that would be, you wouldn't feel that, you wouldn't feel the.
Right. And then you wouldn't have all of them. Correct. It's kind of a systems to check itself. And also in yoga tradition, authoritative testimony, I mean, of course, I'm talking more modern world, like you want actual experts we could call in whatever the topic is. But when we're looking at yoga texts, these texts have been tried. This is why age matters a little, is they've been around long enough for people to have done them and been able to say, yes, this is what happens when you do this thing.
Can I ask a question?
Please.
When I was reading it, I was struggling with direct perception because I don't even know how to explain it. It's like, we know that we're viewing this world with all of our riches. So how can we trust direct perception?
Well, direct perception, specifically on the yogic path, is when the frittis get so slow and sattvic, or they're stopped.
Okay.
So it's either Nirodha and there are no vrittis happening at that moment, or they're so sattvic that we are in that wisdom mind and we have total discernment, viveka.
Okay.
Yeah, great questions. So those are going to be helpful ones. Then we get into 1.8. Can someone read that, please?
Misperception occurs when knowledge of something is not based on its true form.
Okay, so now we're getting into the 4 kinds that are harmful or pain-inducing, painful. And the first is misperception. Does Carrera give the example of thinking a rope is a snake? Yeah, that's the classic one. Of course, remember this. I think this is interesting. Misperception relies on impressions from samskaras. If you had never seen a snake, you would never mistake a rope for a snake. So this is one of the ways our memories are samskaras, which are in part from memories. They're those imprints, how they can mess with us, right? The next one is conceptualization, knowledge based on language alone. And I want to talk about these two together because they can get confusing. It's knowledge that's based on language alone, independent of any external object, is conceptualization. Conceptualization is an opinion. So if I say, she is beautiful, that's conceptualization. That's my opinion. It's also, so it's around ideas and words. It's also false equations. So Gregor Male, which I love, by the way, this book, Ashtanga Yoga, he has the reason we talk, it's just great, but it's got some nice commentary on the sutras in the back. And one of the things he talks about is, like, so for instance, the terrorist was Muslim. My stomach is growling, and all terrorists are bad. Here's where the false equation part comes out, is equals Muslims are bad. Well, that's not true, but that's a conceptualization. That's a painful vritti that causes all kinds of trouble. Let me see. I have a note to myself about page 33. Oh, Carrera says, one of the ways we fall into the pitfalls of conceptualization is when the search for truth is abandoned in favor of things feared or hoped for. Well, my goodness, that sounds a lot like yum yucking. Right? Well, if we're not worried about what's true, and instead we're we're letting what we're afraid of or what we hope for cloud our vision. Well, what we hope for is a yum, and what we fear is a yuck. Truth is that one-pointed. The more one-pointed we get, the more we get out of that yum yuck cycle, the more we get the discernment to see what the truth is. Questions on either misperception and or conceptualizations? You hanging in there? Okay. So the next two, I mean, memory, we talked about memory and how it creates problems, right? It creates desires and aversions. So, give me just a second. Can you remember it?
Yes.
Okay. So for instance, if I have no, let's get back to our chocolate example. If I have no memory of chocolate, when that stimulus comes into my field, if I see a commercial for it or I smell it or whatever, it's not going to, I'm not going to be driven into action. If I have a memory, and by the way, memory can lead to conceptualization. So for instance, if I have a memory of, say, one of my parents getting a certain look right before they said something hateful to me, and then I'm teaching and I see one of you get that look, I've got the memory, which then feeds into conceptualization because I'm like, oh, you don't like me. Well, that's not, who knows that? That's a story in my mind built on memories. Okay, question. Did you have one?
Related to the misperceptions, when it talked about the Santo philosophy, causes misperceptions of like as attachment, for example, egoism, ignorance, etc. How do we discern from, I guess, like our need to feel belonging with attachment, because we conceptualize things and she does, and now I need to attach myself to her because I feel like a sense of belonging because we're conceptualize the same thing the same way.
Well, again, it's always going to come back to sattva-sizing the mind. So the more we do our yoga practices, the more sattvic the mind gets, the more we get into that wisdom mind, and the more we can see when we're doing that. The more we can step back and go, oh, I'm doing this for a sense of belonging, but it's actually conceptualization. And like, is that really the path I want to go down? Is there a way to sattva-size even this relationship with this person? Because the more we do our practices, what happens is we build what's called viveka or discernment, and it just helps us to see more clearly. Viveka. And we'll talk a lot more about that one.
A question, but just something I didn't know. We all will be like, oh, I need to stop my shitty britties and stuff. Like,
We need to do what?
We need to stop our britties.
Stop our britties.
Misperceptions. But I try to, like, we're all human. So like, some of this is survivalistic based, like the snake in the rope. Like it started so that we don't think we want a snake.
Yep.
See it. just reminding myself that like I am human, there's a reason why I'm drawn immediately to like acting this way. And
Yep.
that just helps me when I'm thinking like more big picture. Like that's what yoga's all about, just practicing. So
Yeah.
step away from
Yeah,
the
well,
judgment-based self-
because those are vrittis. Those are vrittis. Yeah. So Mari, could you hear that at all? You did? Okay, good. Those even instinct, I mean, everything we're born into, there's a vritti samskara, everything is behind it. So even our DNA and those things, even the way our brains are wired to react quickly so that we stay alive. In a lot of ways, we have to remember like our DNA is for human survival, not spirit survival, not spirit liberation. So like you can step back and go, oh, okay, that's me being human. My body's going into fight or flight. My mind is because da 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 or whatever. Yeah.
It just helps me with the judgment-based.
Right, because if you start judging yourself then for being human, then you're developing a whole other set of samskaras and vrittis that you're gonna have to unwind out of. Yeah, absolutely. There's a certain amount of grace that we have to grant ourselves. Okay, so the next one is just sleep. I'm not gonna go into that. There's reasons why we're still building vrittis in deep sleep. Is all I'm gonna say for now, for the sake of time. Just a second. Will someone, let me just look at something real quick. Let me get my head together here. I might have someone read. I might not. We are getting there though, right? This afternoon, you don't have to do any sutras. Oh, I skipped right over sleep, in fact, but it's, I'm not gonna go into that if you want to talk about it later and why it's one, I could talk to you, but I don't think it's pertinent, really. All right, so 112. This is a big one. This is a great one for theming a class. Will someone read it?
These mental modifications are restrained by practice and non-attachment.
Oh, here we go. Practice is abhyasa. It's ABHAYSA, abhyasa. Practice. If you want the Sanskrit, I'm just giving it to you because these are two where I think this is a huge one actually. Abhyasa is practice. And then the other wing of the bird, the yoga bird that leads us to liberation, is non-attachment or vairagya. It's VAIRAGYA, vairagya. And hope, I think it's VAIRAGYA. So these mental modifications, meaning these unhelpful ones, we restrain them. We start to control them by our yoga practice, our sadhana specifically, and by non-attachment. And of course, by practices off the mat, like the yamas and niyamas and things like that. But this is really specifically talking about sadhanas. And Rod Stryker, I like what he says. Abhyasa, which is practice, it's going to help us build helpful vrittis. Practice is like an action, right? And the more we do that action, the more it compels us to do the action again. And that's all going to help us get on this path to liberation. So it's building these helpful vrittis. Whereas non-attachment, it helps us to really get rid of the harmful habits, which are kind of a combination of samskaras and vrittis. So abhyasa practice, It has 3 conditions. Does anyone remember what Carrera says they are?
Length, consistency, and enthusiasm.
Yeah, length, consistency, and enthusiasm. So we have 1.13 of these 2, effort towards steadiness. Steadiness, by the way, sattva is always steady. Think steadiness of the pond. We're getting that pond steady. Is practice. And these are huge. By the way, on page 36, he lists some of what is meant by practices: asana, pranayama, meditation, devotion to God or self-surrender, tapas, discriminative discernment, there's that word viveka, and study svadhyaya. Those are in the bullet points on page 36. And in 114, practice becomes firmly grounded. So you know your practice is starting to build more helpful samskaras and vrittis when it's well attended to for a long time. That's pretty straightforward. It's not, there's kind of this thing that starts to happen early on where we're like, ooh, yoga is great. And then the honeymoon stage gets over and we don't stick with it. We're like, why wasn't it as great as it was? And it's like, because it takes a long time, because you've got lifetimes of samskaras we're working on here. Like, this is going to take it took you a long time to get in the mess you're in. So it's going to take a little bit of yoga. It's going to take more than 6 months of, once a week of yoga. So a long time without break means consistency. Notice it doesn't say 90 minutes a day. And I really want to point this out for your sadhana. It is so much more important to be consistent if that means 3 minutes a day. So you've got to let go of those perfectionistic fritzies, because they'll get you in trouble where you're like, well, if I don't do the whole thing, what's the point? Right? Like, what's the point? If I can't get up at 5 a.m. every day and do a 90-minute sadhana, what's the point? The point's consistency. It's so much better to do 3 minutes a day for the next 10 years than to sporadically practice. So much better. We want consistency. And with enthusiasm, I think a better translation is reverence. Enthusiasm makes it sound like it needs to kind of always be fun. I get what he's saying, but I think we need to acknowledge there's going to be days you don't want to do it. In fact, more days you don't than days you do, especially early on. So that is what we're looking for with practice. Enthusiasm, though, I do want to bring up this idea of reverence and enthusiasm, because remember, the vrittis you're building on the mat get stronger. They're kind of supercharged. So if you're just have a real, like, you've got to kind of find a way to tap into some kind of self-love or grace or your sankalpa before you practice. That's going to help offset, any of those more harmful vrittis that might come up. Questions on practice, Abhyasa? Yeah.
So when I first started doing yoga, I had a really consistent physical practice.
Mm-hmm.
And so, really, when we talk about practice, there's just so many versions of it. So it doesn't necessarily revolve around that, right? I should have some of that probably.
Mm-hmm.
But cause it was such a huge shift, the last 8 months, I've had physical practice, but it's but I've had more of a self-study practice.
Yeah.
And more of a devotional practice and stuff like that. And so how do we manage the ebb and flow of that? Where we're sitting there going, okay, I don't want it to be too tamas. I'm not trying to go backwards. Sometimes it kind of feels like I am, because maybe I don't have the same energy as I did a year ago.
I think the key comes to, there's 2 things, is A, really get honest with yourself. Are you yumming or yucking? Is what you're doing a result of yum or yuck? Ooh, I'm doing, or is it it makes you more sattvic? So if it's I just don't feel like doing asana, but this, it feels really good in the moment, and that's the fruit of the action, then maybe you need to reevaluate. But if it's just like, no, I really feel like it's bleeding over into my life off of the mat, so to speak, in ways that make me more calm and peaceful and more sattvic, then keep doing it.
So like if I have a practice where I'm like really focused on trying to capture those riddhis and choose the more useful one, that's just as much of a practice as pretty much anything else, right?
It is. The thing we run into, so this is the 8 limb path, so it's gonna say do all of them.
But yeah, that makes sense.
So if we're talking, what would Patanjali say to you? He'd say do them all, because you need asana, because you're in a body and you gotta get that, you've got to still the vrittis the body is causing. And that's what asana does, partially, it does a lot more. But if the body is causing all kinds of vrittis, because the body is a source of I love Eknatheshwar, and we'll talk, he did your Gita translation and he uses the word hankering. And I love that. But even the body, when things come in through the senses, the body gets hankerings. And so we're just really trying to get that to shh, be quiet. So does that make sense? So
Yeah.
yes, you could say that, and there are practices that don't do all of these.
Well, yeah, there's some practices that really refocus physical body, and then there's more practices that do a little bit more for everything.
Yeah. If we're just doing Patanjali 8 limb yoga, it would say do all of them, but it's also depends, he'd also say it depends on your time of life. There's, as you get older, asana should take up less of a portion. And pranayama starts to take up more in middle age, and then in your later years, meditation. When you're weighing them too. Yeah, and then there's the whole bhakti path, which you don't really necessarily need any of them. Yeah.
Yeah, right, yeah, okay.
Anything else? Okay. All we gotta do is non-attachment. That's all. We'll do non-attachment, and we will do a tiny review at the end just to try to seal in a little bit of this. But remember, hey, I'm telling you right now, you will forget at least 75% of what we talked about today. It's okay. That's why we're on repeat here. And that's why we study the sutras. We don't just like do them over a couple of months. We do this study from now until I think your last class is in September for sutras. So, and even that, it's still just introductory. All right, non-attachment, 115. Non-attachment is the manifestation of self-mastery in one who is free from craving for objects seen or heard about. Seen or heard about implies there's sense, you're either, there's senses, right? There's some kind of stimulus coming in, and there's also kind of like this memory quality to it. So it's non-attachment. And do I want to read the next one yet and talk about them together? I'm going to read this 116. When there's non-thirst for even the gunas, I'll probably come back to this one, which again is sattva, rajas, tamas. So when we're not even thirsting for the gunas due to realization of the purusha. So when we get that pond so still, we realize the purusha. That is supreme non-attachment. I'll come back to that one. 115. So it's taking us full circle because that supreme non-attachment is liberation. That's when the pond is so still, you're not attached to any of the vrittis. You're clear that you are not any vrittis and the vrittis aren't moving you around. But 115, non-attachment, I want to say a few things about it. Again, there's a lot about desire and aversion here, which is yucking. We're free from craving for objects. Craving is, hi, you're good. Craving is yumming after something, right? So it's even being able to step back and being like, oh, there's some yumming happening, but I'm not attached to that outcome. I'm not going to worry about that. it doesn't mean we don't care. And I like to point that out because I think sometimes non-attachment can get this. I have a friend who's actually Buddhist, but it still is the same idea. And he says, non-attachment doesn't mean I don't love my wife. It just means that like, if she decides to up and leave me, I'm going to, I'm not gonna cling on to her. Right? There's this kind of like level of like, I love you, but you're you and you get your own choices. And really it is truly relationships where non-attachment can challenge us the most. I was talking to a friend who's practicing it with her daughter, who is just a real handful right now. And it's hard because it's like she loves her daughter, but her daughter is also being a really mean, spiteful, hateful teenager. And so she's got to kind of let her daughter be this person and also love her. Right. But non-attachment's important to help us get over these yum yucks. And I think, is it Carrera who gives the example of what do you do when you don't get your ice cream? Yeah, perfect example. Yeah, if you get there and there's not the chocolate ice cream or whatever, the place is closed, are you gonna have a meltdown and then go home and like get under the covers and your day is over? Then you're like, okay, that's some attachment right there. I wish I could have just gone and enjoyed being out in the sunshine with my friends or whatever. We are just less subject to our yum yucks. And so it's really asking us, can I get what I don't want in life even happen, the yucks, and can I breathe through it, even though I don't like it? And this is to me where it gets real practical, because again, it's like, I am looking at this as someone who eventually I hope I get liberated, but in the meantime, I just want to live my life in a more liberated way. So when the most horribly painful things are happening, can I have a degree of like zooming out and be like, okay, and I'm still going to breathe through this when and where I can.
Can I add something real quick to that?
Yeah.
In a lot of studying that I've been doing about trauma and like recovering from it, so it's like, say you experience a death or something like that, it's not necessarily like non-attachment. Like you can't get mad at yourself that you're sad that you're experiencing grief, but it's the non-attachment is like rooted in like resiliency and knowing that even though you are experiencing this super hard time, that you are going to come out the other side of it, perhaps even stronger and having some sort of growth from it. And I feel like non-attachment is like knowing that that is a process that is going to happen. Like you can experience pain and suffering, but that you are going to have resiliency afterwards.
Yeah, that's perfectly said. And it's really just what you're saying here is you are going through it going, I'm having these vrittis, but I am not these vrittis. Yeah. And I think trauma, grief, which can go with trauma, I mean, all of these really big pains in life. Yoga isn't ever diminishing them. Yoga is saying, just remember you are not them.
You're not the cause of the effect.
No, you are the cause of the effect. That's a day for, and we'll talk about that with karma, but the effect, yeah, let me come back to that one later, but Amy, that just opens such a can of worms. Yeah, we'll just save that whole comment. But what it is it's an ability to, it doesn't matter if you caused it or not. Like I honestly, yoga is, even if someone is like, why am I doing this? I'm watching this horrible show about a serial killer. But even yoga would say, even that serial killer should, I'm not saying they should go kill, but what they do is they recognize I did something horrible. And then the way to get out of that samskara where they keep killing would be to not identify with I am a killer, but to kind of zoom out and be like, oh, those vrittis. There's a personal responsibility of I did this, but there's also this, but I am not that. Does that make sense? I may be experiencing that, but I am not that. I am Sat Chit Ananda. So I like when I wrap things up with serial killers. Let's get into 1.16. Just to bring it full circle, again, this one, when there is a non-thirst for even the gunas. So in other words, we're not craving, there's no hankering, we're not going after yumming, or yumming really is yucking because we're trying to get an experience other than the painful one, right? When we're not going after these things, including, remember I said eventually you have to unwind even out of sattva? We get to a point where we get so sattvic that starts to become a thing. And those are in way later stages, but we have to even unwind out of that guna. Due to the realization of the Purusha. So we have done so much Nirodhayin through our yoga practices. We have stilled that pond so many times that even when the vrittis come back, we don't hanker after them. We just see them for what they are. We get that pond still again and again and again and again until it becomes a samskara. And then we obtain supreme non-attachment because we know we are not the gunas and we don't hanker after their cause or their effect. They're any of the yum yucking they cause us. And that is caused by Nirodha. So all the way back to 1.2. Oh, no, I'm just tying it in a bow, Amy, and we're out of here. No, I'm kidding. Yes,
I had a question, because I
please.
think I'm here with this, trying to figure this out
Yeah.
more. Because I really truly love to be in nature and crave it. And
Mhm.
I know it's that sattvic state that I love, that I get out of it.
Yeah.
But yet, even when I am in meditation, not that I'd rather, but I am always wanting to be in nature. So that's a craving, that's a desire. And it says, when you can non-thirst for even the guna, the nature, gunas are nature, to be in that nature state.
Okay. I think there's I need to clarify some terms. So yes, Prakriti is nature, but it's also everything. So sometimes in Indian tradition, the word nature is used for Prakriti, but it doesn't mean leaves and trees or ocean and rocks. It is that, but it's also the thoughts in your head, the saliva on your tongue, the roadkill on the road. It's everything in its totality that is not Purusha is considered nature. So will you read that sutra to me, please, if you have it open?
There is non-thirst for even the guna, constituents of nature, due to realization of Purusha, that is supreme, not a.
Yeah. So for you, so when it says constituents of nature, it means all of that stuff. Your thirst for nature, small n nature, like being out in nature, as we call it, probably does make you very sattvic, right? But yeah, there is a time where you get your mind, the vritti, still enough, often enough that even the craving for that peace that it brings you, you realize that's transitory. It changes. It's not going to last. And so it's not, what does last is Purusha. And so that becomes what you become one pointed toward. And it doesn't matter. You don't hanker after nature because you hanker after Purusha in all circumstances. Whether you're on the toilet, whether you're in line at Walmart, whether you're in nature, your hankering is for Purusha. To realize who you are. And when even that kind of goes away and you just realize you don't have to hanker for it, you just are that, then you've unwound out of the gunas.
How could you say for shamans who want to just live in nature and not be in society? Are they still trying to, they're trying to keep in that state yet? Maybe.
Well, I'd say that it's just a different path.
Yeah.
It's a different tradition. You comparing, it might work, but yoga would say it'll take you only, here's what yoga would say. That's great for now, and it'll make them more sattvic. But, and Eknath Eshwaran would say this, what happens if so he talks, the Gita talks a lot about householders, because the whole idea is, okay, it's great to whatever, go in nature, go meditate in a cave all day, every day, and you get so sattvic, but that's because you're not letting a lot drop into your pond. So you don't know how you're going to react to every stimulus that comes in. So what if you are up in a cave meditating or out in nature for 20 years, and then you come back and the first person who looks at you wrong pisses you off, right? Because you're not used to being around humans and you haven't practiced
So
being
that's not true
sattvic.
Purusha, right?
Yeah, you're not there until you, until you can calm those vrittis no matter the situation. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so can I give you a speedy review? What's Purusha?
Your purity,
Yeah, all that stuff. Prakriti is what?
the macro.
Everything else. What happens with Prakriti and Purusha when we still are vrittis? Purusha's in the sky, Prakriti's,
You become more
Together.
sattvic and connected to Purusha.
Wow.
well, yeah, when we still have vrittis, we want them to become more sattvic. When we complete, and we're in that Mahat mind, when we completely still the pond, I mean, we're floating at kind of the top. It's still a little sattvic, but we get to where it's totally stilled, and kind of Nirodha is, and samadhi liberation is really starting to happen up in here, where there's just, there's no vrittis, there's no gunas, we're moving beyond all of that. Okay. But the practice of stilling the vrittis also allows us to then choose between helpful and harmful vrittis. Right? And the more we do that, then we are starting to change our patterns, which creates some scaras, because the more we do something, the more likely we are to do it again. Or the more we hated doing something, the more likely we are to avoid it. And so we're trying to, again, get our mind, when we're sattvic, it's one pointed, because we are always saying, what am I doing here now?
And the one pointedness is towards Purusha,
Which is self-realization or liberation,
but that's the one pointedness, like that's the goal of being one pointed.
is liberation.
Cool, okay.
Yeah, yeah. And eventually you get not even one pointed, because one pointed still implies there's a certain vritti. And by the way, in devotional practices, that vritti is it would be God. Who said that earlier? Someone mentioned God. Like in a devotional practice, you just think about God. It's just, I'm cooking a meal for my kids, and my kids are a part of God. Everything is like, woo, devotional. Here it's like a little more like toward Purusha, but that is the idea, but it's still a vibration until even, or a vritti until even that is transcended. And even that's so still that you're just like self-realized, you're remembered. I told you, we're doing it all in one morning. But now all the things where you're like, I just stopped listening for 10 minutes and now I don't know what's happening. If you did that, that's okay. If you're like, I'm so tired, I don't want to hear any more about this Prakriti Purusha, that's okay. But what's important is now you have that, we've dipped the cloth. And now we just get to keep dipping it, but we've discussed the big ideas. And now from now on, it's just reiterating the big ideas. The big idea is still the vrittis, so you don't think you're the vrittis, so you remember who you really are and you get liberated. So why'd that take 2.5 hours? I don't know. But it did, so, yeah, well, it's 12:30. Are you? Did I keep you too long? Shit.
I'm sorry, I didn't stop because I was like, well, I was
keep
late,
going.
so maybe.
I'm so embarrassed. Okay, you all stop me if I ever do that again. Austin's gonna be thrilled with me, but the good news is he does this to me.
It's okay.
We started at 9:30. Oh, good Lord. Okay, I'm sorry. I'm very sorry I kept you so long, but come back at 1:30.
1:30?
Yeah, you get an hour for lunch. Austin's gonna be thrilled because it's gonna cut into his stuff. I'm not gonna, no, we don't take it out on you when we make mistakes. We take it out on each other. Yeah, yeah. I'm so, oh my gosh, I kept thinking, I'm like, why do I have more time to go into this stuff than I usually do? No, well, and I was like, they're even acting more tired. I mean, they're real tired at this point. Okay, I'm sorry. Go to lunch. I'll see you later tomorrow. Bye. My gosh. Y'all, please never let me do that again. I don't think I've ever done that. That's embarrassing. Okay. Oh. Call him.
Okay.
Like, why does the second half feel so long?
I'm sorry.
I completely screwed up. Hi, did you see Rebecca's text? I don't know what I did. I thought I had 3 hours and I just kept talking. I am so sorry. If there's a way I can make it up to you in the morning and cut out some of my time, I'm happy to do that.
So this morning when we were doing.
Okay, I am just, oh my God, I'm mortified. I'm so sorry. But yeah, if we need to reduce tomorrow's time to make it up, just let me know. I don't know. I hope so. I mean, it seemed like it, but I don't know.
Great.
I don't know. Oh my gosh, this is, yeah. At 1:30 instead of 1. I was like, I am landing right on time. I thought I was getting him out 1 minute early. But anyhow, so I'm sorry. Okay, thank you for granting me grace.
That's the one that I guess not controlled.
Okay, we'll see you later. Okay. I will. Okay, have a good rest of the day. Okay, bye. So don't do what I just did.
I'm sorry.
No, don't, you, no.
I thought to myself, well, I'm not gonna interrupt because the conversation